The sound of my alarm clock blaring at 6 a.m. was always the first thing I heard before starting my routine. I have been a man of discipline: wake up, shower, breakfast, work. It wasn't that my life was dull. It was structured. I believe in order. I believe in commitment. I believe in my wife, Olivia. We have been married for 8 years. I met her when we were both fresh out of college, working our way up in the world. She was sharp, driven, and had a smile that could light up any room. In the beginning, we were inseparable, but lately, things had started to change. At first, they were small things: her sudden habit of keeping her phone face down, late nights out with friends she never mentioned before, a distant look in her eyes when we talked. I told myself it was nothing, that marriage had its ups and downs, and we just needed to reconnect. But deep down, something gnawed at me. One night, I came home late from work. I was exhausted, expecting Olivia to be asleep. Instead, I found her sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her expression unreadable. "Hey," I greeted her, loosening my tie. She barely looked up. "Hey." I walked over and kissed her forehead, but she pulled away ever so slightly. It was subtle, but I felt it. I sat down beside her. "Long day?" She nodded, her fingers tapping quickly against her phone screen. "Yeah, work's been stressful." I leaned back. "We should take a weekend trip. Just us. No work, no distractions." Her response was immediate. "I don't know, Noah. I have a lot going on right now." I studied her face, searching for the woman I married. "You sure? We haven't really spent time together lately." She sighed, locking her phone and standing up. "I'm tired, Noah. Can we not do this right now?" I watched her retreat to the bedroom. My gut twisted. Something wasn't right. A week later, I finally had a reason to confirm my suspicions. I had taken the afternoon off, something Olivia didn't expect. As I walked toward our driveway, I noticed her car wasn't there. She had told me she was working from home today. Maybe she went out for coffee, I told myself, but something pushed me to check. I pulled out my phone and opened the tracker app we had installed years ago for safety reasons. Olivia had once been paranoid about emergencies, insisting we always know where each other was. Her location popped up, but she wasn't at a coffee shop. She was at a hotel. My body stiffened. My mind raced. This could be anything, I reasoned. Maybe she was meeting a friend. Maybe it was for work. But the doubt had been planted. I drove to the hotel, my heart hammering in my chest. The parking lot was half full, and I scanned for Olivia's car. There it was, parked neatly near the entrance. I could have turned around. I could have ignored it. But I had to know. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, the scent of expensive cologne and fresh linen hanging in the air. I approached the front desk, my pulse pounding. The receptionist, a young woman with bright red lipstick, looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" I hesitated, then pulled myself together. "I'm looking for my wife, Olivia Carter. She might be here for a meeting." The receptionist smiled politely. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't disclose guest information." I exhaled slowly. "Right? Of course." Then, as if on cue, I saw her. Olivia stepped out of the elevator, laughing softly at something. She wasn't alone. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp suit walked beside her. His hand briefly touched the small of her back before they stopped near the bar. My stomach dropped. I wanted to storm over, demand answers, cause a scene. But something inside me told me to wait. I stepped back, watching. Olivia leaned in close to the man, her fingers grazing his wrist. His hand slid over hers. I had seen enough. That night, Olivia came home as if nothing had happened. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands clasped together. When she walked in, she barely glanced at me before heading toward the fridge. "How was work?" she asked casually. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Same as usual." "You?" She poured herself a glass of water. "Busy. Meetings all day." "Liar." I watched her closely. "Meet anyone interesting?" She paused for the briefest moment before shaking her head. "Nope." Something inside me snapped. "Don't lie to me, Olivia." Her head whipped around. "Excuse me?" I stood up, my voice controlled but firm. "I know where you were today." Her face paled. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the location history. "You were at a hotel. With another man." She blinked, then let out a laugh, cold sharp. Are you spying on me now? My hands clenched into fists. Don't turn this on me. Who is he? She crossed her arms. A client. We had a meeting. At a hotel? Yes, Noah. Sometimes business meetings happen in places other than an office. I searched her face for any sign of the woman I thought I knew. You're lying. She sighed dramatically. You're being paranoid? Then let me see your phone. Her grip on the glass tightened. No. I felt my chest tighten. Why not? Because I don't have to prove anything to you. We stood there in silence, the air between us thick with tension. I knew. She knew. This was the moment everything changed. After that night, our marriage became a Cold War. Olivia stopped pretending. She didn't try to be affectionate, didn't bother hiding her disdain when I questioned her late nights. Every conversation turned into an argument. Every silence stretched like a chasm between us. I tried to hold on. I wanted to believe there was still something left to save. But deep down, I knew I was grasping at air. She had already checked out. The evidence piled up quickly. Unexplained expenses, deleted messages, whispered phone calls. But I needed more than just suspicion. If I confronted her again without proof, she would twist the narrative, make me the unreasonable husband who didn't trust his wife. So I made a choice. I was going to find out the truth, no matter what it took. I contacted a private investigator. His name was James Carter. No relation, just a coincidence. He was in his late 50s, a former cop who had seen it all. You want me to catch her in the act? He asked, stirring his coffee. I nodded. I need solid proof. Something undeniable. James exhaled through his nose. You think she's just cheating? Or is she planning something worse? His question made my skin crawl. Worse. He leaned forward. I've seen cases where the cheating spouse tries to frame the other, claim abuse, financial fraud, whatever it takes to come out clean in a divorce. I swallowed hard. She wouldn't do that. James shrugged. People are full of surprises. Let's see what we find. A week later, James handed me a file. Inside were photos, Olivia with the same man from the hotel, holding hands, kissing in a car, entering another hotel. There were timestamps, transaction records. It was everything I needed, but that wasn't the worst part. She's been talking to a divorce lawyer, James said, watching my reaction. And from what I've gathered, she's planning to accuse you of domestic abuse. I felt the air leave my lungs. What? She's setting up a case against you. False reports, witnesses lined up. It's a full-blown attack. My head spun. Why would she do that? James leaned back. Money. She wants the house, the assets, maybe even alimony. If she makes you the bad guy, she gets it all. A cold rage settled in my chest. She wasn't just betraying me. She was trying to destroy me. That evening, Olivia came home late, reeking of perfume that wasn't hers. I sat in the living room, the file of evidence on the table in front of me. She barely glanced at me. What's this? I gestured to the file. Open it. She sighed, clearly irritated, and flipped through the pages. As she scanned the photos, her face remained unreadable. Then she laughed. This is pathetic, Noah. I clenched my jaw. That's all you have to say? She tossed the file onto the table. So, you hired someone to stalk me? Do you even hear yourself? You're sleeping with another man, Olivia. She shrugged. So what? I stared at her, barely able to contain my fury. You lied to me. You looked me in the eye and lied. She rolled her eyes. Noah, our marriage has been dead for years. I just moved on first. I stood up, my hands trembling. Then why not ask for a divorce? Why the games? Why try to frame me for something I didn't do? Her expression darkened. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my phone and played the recording James had found, a conversation between her and her lawyer, discussing how to manipulate the court. She paled. You really thought I wouldn't find out? I asked. She recovered quickly. Even if you have that, who do you think the court will believe? A heartbroken husband or a scared wife? A chill ran down my spine. She had planned everything, but she underestimated me. I spent the next week assembling my defense. James helped me gather more evidence, bank statements, text logs, even audio recordings of Olivia discussing her affair with a friend. I documented everything, including my interactions with her. making sure she had no way to twist reality. Then I filed for divorce first. The moment Olivia received the papers, she lost control. "You're divorcing me?" she shrieked, slamming the documents onto the counter. I crossed my arms. "That was the plan, wasn't it?" She scoffed. "You don't get to decide that. You don't get to be the victim here." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Oh, but I am Olivia. And soon, the court will know it too." For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She had expected me to crumble. Instead, I was fighting back, and I wasn't done yet. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, and I walked into the courthouse with my lawyer, Daniel Reeves. He was a seasoned divorce attorney, sharp and ruthless, exactly what I needed. Olivia was already there, dressed in a modest navy blue dress, her face painted with just the right amount of sorrow. Her lawyer, a smug-looking man named Richard Dawson, whispered something to her, and she nodded. I knew their strategy: play the victim, make me look like the abuser, and walk away with everything. Too bad for them. I came prepared. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, glanced at the documents before her. "Let's begin. Mrs. Carter, your attorney has presented claims of emotional and physical abuse. Do you wish to speak on this matter?" Olivia let out a shaky breath. "Yes, Your Honor." She turned towards me, her eyes welling up with fake tears. Noah was controlling, obsessive. At first, I thought it was love, but over the years, he became possessive. He tracked my phone, accused me of cheating, and whenever I tried to have a life outside of our marriage, he became aggressive. She sniffled for effect. I was afraid to leave. I knew if I did, he'd ruin me. Her lawyer nodded sympathetically. "Your Honor, we have testimonies from Mrs. Carter's close friends who witnessed her distress, as well as financial records showing how Mr. Carter monitored her spending and limited her independence." I clenched my jaw. The audacity. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Carter, how do you respond to these allegations?" I took a deep breath and leaned forward. "Your Honor, everything my wife has said is a lie, and I can prove it." I signaled Daniel, and he handed a folder to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. "These are private investigator reports," Daniel stated. "They contain photographic evidence of Mrs. Carter engaging in an extramarital affair." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Olivia stiffened. "We also have financial records proving Mrs. Carter used marital funds to finance her affair. Hotel stays, expensive dinners, even gifts for the man she was seeing." The judge flipped through the documents, her expression unreadable. "Go on." Daniel pressed play on an audio recording. Olivia's voice filled the courtroom. "I'll tell the court he was abusive. They always believe the woman. He won't stand a chance." Silence. The color drained from Olivia's face. I turned to her, my voice steady. "You tried to destroy me, Olivia, but the truth has a way of coming out." Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, my client." The judge held up a hand. "Mrs. Carter, do you have anything to say about this recording?" Olivia opened her mouth, then closed it. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead. She swallowed. It was taken out of context. The judge's gaze hardened. "Then let's provide context." Daniel stood. "We also have text messages, Your Honor." More evidence was handed over. Messages Olivia had sent to her affair partner, detailing how she planned to manipulate the divorce. At that moment, she knew she had lost. Her facade cracked. "This isn't fair," she whispered, her voice shaking. "No, please. Let's just talk about this." I stared at her, feeling nothing but exhaustion. "You had your chance, Olivia. You made your choice." The judge sighed, setting the papers aside. "Given the overwhelming evidence of dishonesty and malicious intent, I find Mrs. Carter's claims unsubstantiated. The court rules in favor of Mr. Carter." My chest loosened as a weight lifted. I had won, and Olivia had nothing left. The courtroom was silent as the judge's gavel came down. The words "ruling in favor of Mr. Carter" echoed in my mind, and a sense of calm washed over me, mixed with the bitter taste of everything that had happened. Olivia sat in the chair across from me, her face pale, her eyes glassy with disbelief. The lawyer, who had been so confident just moments ago, now looked helpless. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't summon any sympathy, not after everything. Instead, I turned to Daniel. What happens next? We file for the final dissolution of your marriage, and from there, it's just the division of assets. Based on today's evidence, Olivia doesn't have much leverage. I nodded. Good. Let's finish this. As we stood to leave, Olivia caught my eye. No, she whispered, barely audible. You don't have to do this. We could fix things. I paused, my heart briefly clenching at the thought. But then I remembered the betrayal, the lies, and the way she'd tried to tear everything apart. You're too late. The weeks following the trial were a blur. There was paperwork to file, assets to divide, and a life to rebuild from the rubble she'd left behind. But the hardest part wasn't the legal battles, it was the people around me. The whispers started almost immediately. Family members who had once been on Olivia's side now hesitated to make eye contact with me. Friends I'd trusted fell into awkward silence whenever I walked into a room. The phone calls came next. Are you sure about this, Noah? My mother's voice trembled over the line. Divorce is such a heavy thing. Can't you two talk? I clenched my fist. I'm sure, Mom. I'm sorry, but I am. My father, ever the silent observer, simply nodded when I told him. He didn't say a word, but the look on his face was one of resignation, like he'd known all along this would happen, even if I hadn't. Olivia's family turned on me just as quickly. They called me a liar, an opportunist, and a man willing to destroy his own marriage for pride. But it didn't matter anymore. I'd lived through their judgments for years. The only person who seemed to support me was my younger brother, Aaron. He had always been more of an outsider in the family, and his blunt honesty was something I appreciated now more than ever. I'm proud of you, Noah, he said, sitting across from me one night. She was toxic. You did the right thing. His words, simple as they were, felt like a lifeline. While I focused on moving forward, Olivia's desperation grew. She called me several times in the first few weeks after the ruling, but I ignored them. I wasn't interested in her pleas for reconciliation or her promises to change. Eventually, I received a letter. I opened it carefully, my stomach nodding as I read her words. No, I know I've made mistakes, but we've been through so much together, and I can't imagine a life without you. Please, let's find a way back to each other. I'll do anything to make it right. I laughed bitterly, tossing the letter aside. She hadn't learned anything. The woman who had once been my wife was now a stranger. She was no longer someone I cared for, and I knew deep down that I could never go back to her. I shredded the letter, ignoring the part of me that wanted to believe it could all be fixed. It couldn't. I received another shock when I found out Olivia had filed a police report against me. She claimed that during our final argument before the divorce, I had threatened her. The accusation was completely baseless, but it sent me reeling. I had to sit through a series of interviews, lawyers present, defending myself against a false claim. It was an exhausting, demoralizing process. The fact that she had resorted to playing that card made my blood boil. But it wasn't over yet. Months later, during a final mediation session regarding the division of property, Olivia made one last attempt to get back at me. She came in with a new lawyer, someone even more ruthless than Richard Dawson. This time, she demanded a larger portion of the assets, claiming she was entitled to more because I had emotionally abused her. I was stunned. How could she still manipulate the situation after all that had been exposed? I calmly responded, Olivia, I've already given you more than you deserve. The court already made its decision. I'm done. The mediator glanced between us, sensing the tension in the room, but he knew better than to try to sway the outcome. Olivia had no case left. Finally, the day came when I could close the book on my marriage. The divorce was finalized, and Olivia was granted a small settlement. But even with that, she didn't seem satisfied. Her need for revenge, her desire to tear me down, had only been temporarily satisfied by the petty victories she'd fought for along the way. For me, it was over. I moved into a new apartment, smaller than the home we'd shared, but with a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. I filled it with the few possessions I cared about, books, photos, a few personal items. It was mine, a space I could truly call my own, and with that, I began to rebuild. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was finally free. Months passed after the finalization of the divorce, and slowly, I began to find peace. It wasn't an easy process. There were days when I still woke up in the middle of the night, haunted by memories of Olivia's deceit. The anger would rise within me, a fire that threatened to consume my every thought. But then, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I started to realize that I had survived the worst of it. I had gone through the betrayal, the lies, the public humiliation, and I was still here. I was still standing. I took time for myself. Time to heal, time to rediscover who I was without the weight of a broken marriage holding me down. I reconnected with old friends, those who hadn't picked sides or judged me. I found solace in quiet moments, in walks through the city, and in late-night conversations with people who understood the weight of starting over. In the quiet of my new apartment, I rediscovered pieces of myself that I'd lost during the years I'd been with Olivia. I had spent so much time trying to make our marriage work, trying to fit myself into a life I wasn't meant for, that I had forgotten what it was like to just be. I spent hours writing, something I hadn't done in years. I poured my thoughts into journals, letting the pain and anger spill out onto the pages. But I also wrote about hope, about the future, about the possibility of rebuilding my life, brick by brick. Eventually, I started seeing a therapist, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand the damage that had been done, not just to me, but to the man I had become over the course of the marriage. I learned to forgive myself. For so long, I had blamed myself for not seeing the signs, for ignoring the little things that didn't sit right. I thought I had failed Olivia, that I had somehow been less than the man I should have been. But through therapy, I realized I had done the best I could with the tools I had at the time. The problem wasn't me. It was the way Olivia had manipulated me, the way she had broken my trust. And the most important thing I learned was that it was okay to move on. It was okay to rebuild, to reclaim the pieces of my life that I had lost. As part of my healing, I decided to travel. I needed a change of scenery, a break from everything that reminded me of the past. I booked a flight to the coast and spent a week in a small beach town, walking along the shore, letting the ocean waves wash away the remnants of the past. That trip was a turning point for me. One evening, as I sat on the beach watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something profound. I was free, not just from Olivia, but from the person I had been in that toxic relationship. I was free to be whoever I wanted to be, to make choices that were my own, without fear of judgment or manipulation. It was in that moment, as the golden light of the setting sun bathed me in warmth, that I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I had been through the worst and come out the other side stronger, and I was ready to embrace what came next. When I returned from my trip, I was different. The weight I had carried for so long had been lifted, and I felt more grounded than I ever had. I reconnected with a few people from my past, people I had distanced myself from during my marriage. There was Emily, an old friend from college who had always been supportive, even when I didn't see it. We met for coffee one morning, and the conversation flowed effortlessly, just like it had before everything had gone wrong. And then there was Sarah. Sarah had been a casual acquaintance, a colleague from a work project years ago. She was kind, intelligent, and effortlessly charming. We kept in touch on social media, but I hadn't really considered anything beyond friendship. But after my trip, after I had finally let go of my past, I found myself reaching out to her. Not for any specific reason, just to reconnect. We talked for hours, and as the days turned into weeks, I realized something unexpected. I was beginning to look forward to seeing her again. It was still too early to say what might come of it, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope, a sense that the future could be brighter, and that maybe love, the real kind, was still possible. One evening, a few months after my trip, I received a message from Olivia. I know we haven't spoken in months, but I just wanted to apologize. I don't expect anything from you. I just want you to know that I'm sorry for everything I did to you. I was wrong, and I hope you find peace. I stared at the message for a long time. I had spent so many months angry at her, consumed by the betrayal, the lies, and the hurt. But in that moment, I realized that the apology wasn't for me, it was for her. It was the first step in her own journey to accept the consequences of her actions. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. The closure wasn't for Olivia, it was for me. I'd already moved on, and so life moved forward. I found strength in the quiet moments, in the new beginnings, in the future I had yet to shape. The scars of the past would always be with me, but they no longer defined me. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided by betrayal. I was someone who had learned from his mistakes, rebuilt his life, and moved forward with strength and resilience. No longer weighed down by guilt, shame, or anger, I had finally learned to let go. I was free, and I was ready for whatever came next.